the National Weather Service.
Hello everyone and Happy New Year. Welcome to Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. On the hazardous weather graphic, we've got winter weather advisories here in the yellow shaded areas from the northern Kuskokwim Valley up across Tanana into the Koyukuk Valley there, and then eastward across the Yukon Flats. That's for blowing snow with winds gusting 35 miles an hour, reducing visibilities to less than half a mile at times throughout this entire area, but does not include the greater Fairbanks area right there. And this is a high wind warning that's out. Currently, the Alaska Range is under the influence of a high wind warning, as well as a 40-mile country here in the east. And that is out for gusts to, actually this begins at 6 a.m. Tuesday and will last until midnight Tuesday night. And that's for winds gusting 25 to 35 miles an hour with gusts above 50 miles an hour. And that goes into effect again tomorrow through tomorrow evening. And then there's a blizzard warning out for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast there for blizzard conditions with visibilities near zero at times and gusty winds. And that's out until midnight Tuesday night and goes into effect at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. And out to the west here, winter weather advisory comes into effect again for the St. Lawrence Island area. Well, actually, again, they had a warning before. Now it's an advisory. Bering Strait coast, same thing. That goes into effect tomorrow. Winds 45 miles an hour, snow and blowing snow, visibilities maybe down to less than half a mile at times. Moving on to satellite imagery. Here's the next storm rolling northward. The front that came up yesterday all the way to the north, way into just about central Canada now. This next one spreading after the foot of snow that fell over some portions of the southeast coast today, especially up over the northern areas, changing to rain. Still some snow going on late Monday afternoon or during the afternoon Monday, Haines on up the Klondike Highway to White Pass, but rain in Juneau, rain Sitka, and the warmer air down to the south. And then this next system coming up that's going to increase the winds. We had storm warnings today, Kodiak Island, western North Gulf Coast areas in across Kachemak Bay and the Barrens. Back to the west, some clearing there showing up from Norton Sound on down into the Bering Sea here. We could have seen a little bit of sun today at the Pribilof Islands, and it looks like the clouds rolled back in. Narrow band of clearing there down across Atka Island, and more cloudiness out here to the west. That's where the colder air is out there with snow showers out towards Shemya. Not too bad up over the interior, just some variable high clouds. Winds sort of on the increase here across much of the interior, and of course that's going to translate eventually into high wind warnings there, as I mentioned, for the portions of the 40-mile country in the Alaska Range. And there's a weak band of moisture here moving northward there, kind of that leftover trough that rotated west-northwest last night. And so much improved conditions there over the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait coast. And you can see also the clearing shifting out that way as this next front rotates in with the wind and rain here across the Alaska Peninsula, up along the North Gulf Coast, rain into Prince William Sound, rain at Seward, rain at Whittier, Cordova, and snow hung up in the mountains of the Coast Range. On the chart today, there's roughly the position of the front at 3 p.m. Monday afternoon with the low center at 961 millibars south of Sand Point. Rain continuing here for the southeast coast. On the increase again with the wind and rain increasing along the North Gulf Coast, and snow starting to increase on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range and here possibly over the Kilburk Mountain areas with a break back to the northwest, and just a few flurries over the interior areas. For the forecast tonight, that low center tracks right up into northeast Bristol Bay here, right over Bristol Bay. The front arcing up into the interior like this, quite a gradient developing now across, well, from actually the Gulf of Alaska right on up across the Alaska Range. Pretty good winds starting to pick up. South central Alaska see some good increase in the winds, especially through Turnagain Arm, and the higher pass areas we'll see could see gusts as high or over 70, 75 miles an hour here through these areas with that tight of a gradient. And again, the 50+ mile per hour wind gusts expected over the Alaska Range and into the 40-mile country here. Just a narrow band of light snow with this front. It's going to be more of a wind producer than snow producer, and looks like some pretty good clearing taking place here from the Arctic coast across the northwest interior, right on down into St. Lawrence Island and the northern Bering Sea. Snow showers, colder temperatures wrapping back in around this low center that's just west-southwest of St. Paul Island. And snowfall levels will come down to about sea level here toward Yakutat late tonight, with a mixture of rain or snow showers on into the eastern Aleutians. And rain and wind continues for Kodiak Island. And then for Tuesday, tomorrow, weak system here lifting, trough lifting northward, kind of iffy on the exact track and strength of this thing, but definitely looks like more moisture will come up to the North Gulf Coast and keep it wet, especially right up along the coastline, with lesser amounts inland, downsloping winds. High wind warning continues throughout the day tomorrow over the eastern interior. Low center there over the southwest interior, with the area light snow up to the northwest, showery over the Aleutians. And for the southeast coast, looks like more rain spreading on in. And then that front shifts eastward right over the panhandle on Wednesday. So it's going to be a wet day across the southeast coast from Dixon Entrance all the way up to Yakutat, cutting off around Cape Yakataga, maybe a little bit of light snow into the Wrangell Mountains. And then a trough and colder air coming in from the west and northwest, so snow showers and a little cooler temperatures coming into the southwest interior, and a band of snow will shift across the Kuskokwim Valley to the Alaska Range and try to spill into the Susitna Valley, possibly, definitely for Denali, back to the northwest all the way to the western Arctic coast. And I passed it a little too fast, but the next front coming into the Aleutians there with gale force winds and good shot of rain, again, Wednesday and Wednesday afternoon. Otherwise, lows tonight below zero, but not that far below, although 12 below forecast for Point Lay, 19 below over at Tok, and lower to mid 30s here, south central Alaska. That pattern all the way out, maybe lower 30s out over the western Aleutians. Highs for tomorrow, nudging up towards zero there, north slope in the Arctic coast. Under mild southerly flow, we got 40s right into the Kuskokwim Valley, south central Alaska. Upper 30s to lower 40s. Mid 40s here for the coastal areas of the Panhandle, mid 30s up toward White Pass, and then the lows for tomorrow night shaping up like this Wednesday morning. Still below zero there, Northway Tok in the colder area there, and up over the Yukon Flats, falling a little bit below zero. Same thing for the Arctic coast, maybe down to 10, 15 below for the North Slope possibly, and then upper teens here up over the west central interior, on out to the Seward Peninsula. 20s across the southwest, including the Kuskokwim Valley and lower and mid Yukon Valley. Lower 30s for Kodiak Island, and 30s to lower 40s, kind of an isolated 41 there at Port Alexander for the low temperature. And then the highs looking like this, 30s in the southwest, single numbers in teens over the northeast interior all the way to the Arctic coast, and 40s, lower 40s for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into flying weather now. I've got a band of marginal VFR here coming up through the southwest interior, off to the northeast there. Widespread IFR up over the Arctic coast and part of the north slope there in the central area. Some IFR lingering here over the northwest Bering, just catching St. Matthew Island. Otherwise, marginal VFR. Starting out VFR here for the Fox Islands, IFR Bristol Bay, IFR North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, down the Panhandle and along the southern and eastern slopes of the Alaska Range. This area enhances tomorrow afternoon. Big area now of IFR over the southwest interior, northward into the Selawik and Kobuk valleys, and then back eastward across the northern Koyukuk, southern part of the, or south side of the Brooks Range. IFR up here, central eastern Arctic coast, and a little bit of IFR downsloping conditions there on the lee side of the Brooks Range. VFR here through the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, northward into the Yukon Flats, and IFR over the northern Panhandle and along the coast. Going to, let's see, Wednesday morning, a little bit more IFR now here over the southeast coast again, marginal down toward Dixon Entrance, or over in the southeast part of the southeast. Band of IFR up along the coastline here and into the coast range, back around into western Prince William Sound, and IFR still on the south side of the central Alaska Range, back down across the east side here. A little more extensive now than it has been, And still a lot of IFR here over the western interior, VFR over the eastern Arctic coast, and VFR for Kodiak Island and part of the Alaska Peninsula. Not looking too bad down here for the eastern Aleutians on out to about Atka, maybe Adak, and then becomes marginal towards Shimia. And for Wednesday afternoon, IFR up here along and south of the Brooks Range into the Kobuk Valley and off to the northeast there, VFR eastern Arctic coast, and VFR there from Cape Lisburne down around to Kivalina, maybe Nome, south side of the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, lots of marginal stuff over the Bering Sea, and some IFR creeping northward here into the far western Aleutians. Just about reaching Adak, or it looks like it will reach Adak late in the afternoon. IFR holding here over the southeast coast, and just a patch now along the North Gulf Coast. Passes Anaktuvik, marginal VFR. Definitely lower conditions here on the southern entrance, probably IFR there as some moisture slowly lifts northward tomorrow, and same forecast for Adigan with the lowest flying conditions on the southern entrance, otherwise marginal VFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, same pattern we've seen for several days now with marginal VFR, IFR eastern entrance, both passes, and probably it may just go flat out IFR on Wednesday. And then for rainy, same forecast, IFR eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. Windy, IFR possible, south entrance, marginal, and then VFR on the north entrance into the valley. Isabel, marginal VFR in the forecast. And for Mentasta, still a chance of some marginal VFR here on the, I'm getting ahead of myself. There will be a chance of marginal VFR on the southern entrance of Mentasta. Tanita now, a chance of some marginal VFR on the eastern entrance. Looks a little more promising for Tuesday night into early Wednesday of marginal VFR, possibly even IFR for a brief time. And for Portage, IFR, and Chilcoot White, IFR. Freezing levels here, 2,000 feet, Kodiak Island, almost to the North Gulf Coast, not quite, but 2,000 to 6,000 feet now showing up over the southern panhandle. And icing, moderate icing possible here along the North Gulf Coast, and then enhanced terrain, enhanced type moderate rime icing along the Alaska Range. Otherwise light here through the shaded area over the western interior from Bristol Bay all the way up to the Brooks Range and along and off the coast of the Panhandle. Taking a look at the jet stream here, south to north flow, 180 knots out of the northwest, swings around. Not all that strong, 60 to 90 knots coming up from the south, but much stronger winds. We'll see it 9,000 feet, really strong winds here with this low center lifting up toward the southwest coast. 55 to 60 knot winds here coming onto the North Gulf Coast, high as 75 knots crossing the eastern Alaska Range, 35 to 40 over the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, much the same pattern, a little more southeasterly, 25 to 50 knots into the interior there. And taking a look at turbulence, widespread area, moderate chop with those strong winds all the way up just about to the Brooks Range over the eastern interior. Very bumpy tomorrow. Could be some areas of severe in here for smaller aircraft. And good moderate chop, considerable moderate chops extends down across the Alaska Peninsula and over the central Aleutians.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30-45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what the spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy, and then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
say 6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Checking out the sea ice analysis for today, January 1st, Monday. Continuing to close off here and increase across the Chukchi Sea. As you can see, the white area a lot more expansive, or the blue area is a lot less than it was yesterday. And now we've got increasing ice here across the northern Bering Sea and continues to drift westward away from the coastline. And that'll continue for the next several days, way it looks right now. Moving on to marine forecast, southeast 25 tomorrow, Tuesday, for the southeast coast here, with seas 17 to as high as 21 feet, where you get into the gales up there on the north coast. Lynn Canal south 25, 5-foot seas, and Clarence Strait 25 knots from the southeast with 7-foot seas, and Stevens Passage gusts to 35 knots out of the southeast. And then for Wednesday, southeast 20 here, all through the inside water, well, not all of the zones, but Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage, and Lynn Canal will be southeast 20 with 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories are 25-knot winds on the south coast here, 14-foot seas, about 15 feet in the north coast, winds otherwise south-southeast at 20. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, gales southeast 35 knots, 7-foot seas, south 35, minimum gales here on the eastern North Gulf Coast, 40 knotters there for the west side, down across the Barrens, seas up to 30 feet. And Cook Inlet here from Kachemak Bay into southern Cook Inlet, 40-knot winds out of the south, 15-foot seas, southeast 30 with 9-foot seas up here over northern Cook Inlet. And then for Wednesday, coming down considerably, back down to 15 knots out of the south-southwest here, northern Cook Inlet, all the way down to Kachemak Bay, the Barrens, and all of the North Gulf Coast, southwest 15, Prince William Sound, much lighter, south at 15, seas coming down to 2 feet. And for the Kodiak zone, gales tomorrow, south-southwest 35 to 40, 30-35 knot winds here across the Alaska Peninsula, and 30 knot winds for Bristol Bay with 8-foot seas. Those come down to 20 knots for the peninsula on Wednesday, 20 knots also for Bristol Bay, Shelikof Strait, and even lighter there on the east side of Kodiak down to 15 knots. Eastern Aleutians west at 30, diminished to southwest 20-25 around Alaska Island, seas 13 feet. 30-knot winds, small craft advisories extend all the way back to Shimian at 2. And then for Wednesday, that next system beginning to come up, so bring the gales back into the west central Aleutians, and 35 to 40-knot winds, Adak and Atka, and southwest 20 to 25 for Alaska Island. Southwest coast shaping up like this tomorrow. North 25 turn northwest at 20, south of Nunivak Island, seas 5 to 6 feet. Southeast here at 10 for the Pribilofs, and St. Matthew Island, we're looking at northeast winds, 25 knots, 30-knot winds, 9-foot seas for St. Lawrence Island. And then on Wednesday, those come down to 20 knots from the north, kind of a more variable wind pattern here over the eastern Bering Sea. East 15 for St. Matthew Island, southwest at 10 to 15 knots south of Nunivak Island, and that 15-knot wind extends all the way back to the Pribilof Islands where seas will be 7 feet. And for Tuesday, gale warnings here, eastern Beaufort Sea coast toward demarcation point, 30 knots for the remainder of the area, come down to 25 on the central coast, turn northeast 25, back up to 30 from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, then back down to north 25 from Cape Thompson down to the Bering Strait. And the outlook for Wednesday, brisk wind advisories here for the Chukchi Sea up to Cape Thompson, and then coming down to 15 on the west side, just 10 knot winds, central coast barely out of the east, and southwest breeze at 10 for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. And for tonight, this front lifts northward across the interior. High wind warnings out for the central eastern Alaska range, gusts over 50 miles an hour later tonight and through tomorrow with that system coming in. A narrow band of snow with it. Rain could be moderate here along the North Gulf Coast, and rain into the Panhandle continues. Back out here to the west, rain and wind for Kodiak Island. Winter weather advisories due to blowing snow over the eastern interior. And for tomorrow, that continues into tomorrow as well. Low center comes up into the Yukon Delta. Generally snow through this area, tapering off to ending here off to the east where the windy conditions. Pretty windy south central Alaska, rain, Kodiak Island, all the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And taking a look at Wednesday, there's the next storm pushing up here into the Aleutians with the gale force winds and a good shot of rain. Colder air and snow showers come back in to the west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.
The National Weather Service.